What if every breathing style used by a demon hunter wasn't just a beautiful visual effect, but the manifestation of a fearsome power? What would the power of each breathing style be like, especially for the Hashiras, with some of them having unique styles, like love breathing, insect breathing, and even serpent breathing? That's what you'll find out during this story. And by the end, you'll see how a temperature of 5,500 degrees turned the Demon King into nothing more than dust. But first, we need to understand how these powers will change everything we know. See, our story begins when Tanjiro arrives at Urokodaki's house for his training. Up until that moment, he was just a young man driven by a deep psychological wound caused by the brutal loss of his family. But the moment he starts practicing water breathing, the world around him stops being ordinary. The water that comes from his blade is not an illusion. It is real, heavy, and devastating. Each attack generates an impressive volume of 300 to 800 gallons of pure water appearing out of nowhere. This creates a crushing power and a recoil impact that no ordinary demon is prepared to face. Tanjiro starts to panic because besides discovering that they exist, he now has to control a hydroelectric power plant in his hands. This new reality makes his survival in the final selection more assured. Although the challenge is still immense, he still manages to pass successfully. When he faces Susumaru and Yahaba, the difference is striking. The water whirlpool technique now has a real physical mass that cushions the impact of falls and redirects attacks with brutal efficiency. The secret here is that Tanjiro's emotion determines the meaning of each strike. If he doesn't feel the need to protect, the water doesn't flow with the same pressure. Water breathing not only provides more mobility, but also an efficient means of fighting against the Onis. The ultimate technique of sun breathing, which we will see later on, reaches a temperature that defies physics itself and the limits of the human body. But the secret of how Tanjiro isn't incinerated by the blade will only be revealed at the end of this journey. The story follows a path similar to the original storyline until we reach Mount Natagumo when Zenitsu is left behind. Tanjiro and Inosuke climb the mountain to face the spider family. They defeat the mother spider in the same way, but the encounter with the father spider reveals something new about beast breathing. Inosuke's beast breathing works with raw and chaotic air pressure, firing wind blades that reach 400 km/h. With that speed and overwhelming strength, they managed to defeat the Oni with an ease that didn't exist in the original story. However, the real ultimate test happens in the fight against Rui. Now, with Inosuke by his side and the powers from the breathing techniques, the hunters are much stronger than in the original story. However, the young hunters are not strong enough to stop a lower moon. And as soon as Inosuke is subdued and Tanjiro is left alone against Rui, water alone was not enough to cut Rui's steel threads. Only when Tanjiro unlocks the sun breathing do the tables finally turn. The heat generated by this technique reaches between 3,000 to 4,000 kg, surpassing the heat of a jet engine. Rui's threads, which once seemed indestructible, become vulnerable to this absurd thermal radiation. And look, because of this temperature, Tanjiro met the physical and mental requirements to unlock the Demon Slayer mark. So, what will be the implications of this event for the rest of the story? Well, you'll find out soon, so watch until the end. So this time, the flame that Tanjiro produced coming from his sword burns Rui's entire body, not giving him the chance to cut off his own head to trick Tanjiro's Nichiren blade. At this point, before the Hashiras arrived at Mount Natagumo, the battle of the Demon Slayers was already over. All because of the powers of Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu. With the end of the battle on the mountain, we will now enter the Mugen Train arc. Here the story changes completely, because the Demon Slayers are now more adaptable, and they can count directly on the physical strength of their members. Even though Enmu traps them in his sleep blood demon art when they wake up instead of Rengoku taking care of the train cars. The one who does it is Zenitsu alongside Nezuko, even seen running through the train with the speed of thunder, shooting lightning wherever he goes, destroying pieces of the Oni's flesh with this powerful hunter present on the train. Rengoku, alongside Tanjiro and Inosuke, leads the attack against Enmu, easily defeating the Oni. And then, when the house appears, Rengoku's flame breathing creates arcs of fire 6 to 15 feet long, with a heat between 1200 and 1600 degrees Celsius. That's why I say, forget everything you've heard about the tragic diagnosis of this hero in the original storyline. In this reality, the truth is more powerful. The house tries to keep its distance to avoid being incinerated. The Onis in this reality are much more cautious. And the house, with its blood demon art, launches its attacks from a distance against Rengoku, something that becomes ineffective thanks to Rengoku's powerful technique. Even though the house is a real monster and adapts to Rengoku's rhythm, at the peak of the fight, Rengoku reaches his limit and his technique hits 2,500 degrees Celsius, releasing his hunter's mark, becoming stronger and faster, with a dragon of flames moving across the battlefield behind the house. And the high temperature makes the Oni's escape through the forest impossible. In an explosion of flames, the house is defeated by Rengoku's enormous power. His body is completely burned and Rengoku survives with an extraordinary feat, defeating an upper moon. His survival changes everything that comes next. With this immense power, the game turns in favor of the hunters. And you think they gained all this power by procrastinating? They organized a training routine with discipline and full focus on their goal. But you, on the other hand, wake up tired, procrastinate everything, and feel like trash at the end of the day. Another month dragging on and nothing changes. Stop respawning into failure. Let me introduce you to my ultimate personal system for organization and productivity. It turns your routine into a personal development RPG. You will level up while having fun, earning coins and rewards for completed tasks. This system is based on methods used by CEOs and high-performance athletes like GTD, Eisenhower, Pomodoro, and much more. It's fun, it's addictive, and it works. Have you wasted too much time already? Click the link in the description and start leveling up your life like a true protagonist. Now, this is where most people get it wrong by thinking that all breathing styles are the same. In the entertainment district, we found out that Usui's sound breathing doesn't create flames or lightning. It creates devastating shockwaves. Imagine a 200 decibel sound hitting you up close. That's strong enough to rupture internal organs and cause permanent damage. Meanwhile, Zenitsu shows that thunder breathing generates real electricity. With a voltage of 50 to 100 million volts, the temperature of each lightning bolt reaches 30,000 degrees Celsius. The same as real lightning, each movement lasts fractions of a second, leaving the ground scorched and the air electrified. The secret to understanding why these techniques are so dangerous lies in the logic of cause and effect. Each session generates a physical reaction that the environment can't contain. Understanding this technical knowledge is the foundation for what you will see in the final battle, where survival will depend on every degree of heat generated. But until then, during the fight against Daki and Gyutaro, Tanjiro takes Sun breathing to a new level of destruction. His base heat now ranges between 2,500 and 3,500 degrees Celsius. Daki's sashes, which were supposed to be her greatest weapon, start turning to ashes even before they touch Tanjiro's blade. He cuts off the demon's head with frightening ease, without needing to reach that state of extreme exhaustion we saw originally. The real threat appears with Gyutaro, whose blood sickles now face a miniature sun. The difficulty here is different now, it's control. If Tanjiro gets too close to his allies, he might end up incinerating his own friends by accident. Zui needs to use his mastery of sound to create openings without burning himself in the process. In the end, they achieve victory with fewer losses. See, Zui didn't lose his eye and his arm during the fight, and he ended up proving that the real power of the elements is a double-edged sword that requires absolute precision. And notice that the mark of the Oni Hunter is something crucial to the story, and in the original timeline Tanjiro awakened it in this arc. However, in this timeline, Tanjiro had awakened it on Mount Natagumo, so yes, Zui awakened his mark in this arc, which means he will live with his wives for 2 more years. Now get ready, because what Tanjiro will learn in the Swordsmith village about his true lineage will make the heat we've seen so far seem like just a spark. There, the pace of the story reaches a turning point where Tanjiro's progress is measured by his new ability, the ability to control the impossible. Everything happens the same way until Muchiru is thrown out of the room after decapitating Rantengo, and Uni creates clones based on his emotions. When he meets Gyoku, we can see and understand Muchiru's mist breathing. In this story, it's not just a visual effect, but the creation of a cold, thick vapor that covers dozens of meters. This phenomenon drops visibility to almost zero and drastically reduces any enemy's reaction time. allowing the hunter to move at extreme speeds while remaining invisible. Meanwhile, Tanjiro can now face the emotion clones on his own. He uses the heat of sun breathing to incinerate the weaker bodies. And look, sun breathing is different from flame breathing, since the heat emanating from flame breathing is not as powerful as sun breathing. That's exactly why regeneration for the Onis, even those of higher rank, becomes even more difficult, or practically non-existent when fighting against a user of sun breathing. Without some of his clones, fusion into the hatred clone's transformed form becomes impossible. While Tanjiro exterminates Rentengo's clones alone, Mitsuri's arrival at the village brings love breathing, which creates a heated energy in the form of a ribbon. Flexible and fast, capable of attacking from unpredictable angles to maintain constant pressure, saving the Swordsmiths from the fish created by Gyoku. Upper rank 5 is still defeated by Multi-Row, but despite everything as I mentioned before, the demons are much more cautious. Precisely because of that, the real Rentengo managed to hide his presence from Tanjiro until sunrise, out of pure and utter desperation. Until dawn, Tanjiro continues to sacrifice Nezuko to destroy the demon. Because of that, Nezuko acquires immunity to sunlight, something that makes Muzan go to the Demon Slayer Core to absorb her and become a perfect being. By bringing everyone into his domain, the final battle in the Infinity Castle is completely different. Without the house present and with Rengoku, the dynamics of the fights change completely. While Shinobu is fighting alone against Duma, the Upper Moon 2 in the original storyline, here she has the help of Rengoku and Tomioka. While Tanjiro is alongside Gyomei, Sanemi, Multiro and Genya fighting against Kokushibo, the Upper Moon 1, Yingana continues with the powers of the breathing techniques. Things would get easier in this particular fight because look, Kokushibo is also a former demon slayer, which means he also has powers that come from his breathing techniques. The demon blood not only doubled this power but even tripled it. So the battle here becomes even more arduous, with each fighter using the maximum of their physical abilities. Sanemi's wind breathing unleashes blades of air at 600 km per hour, while Gyomei's stone breathing generates a seismic force that cracks the very ground. The physical cost, or rather the wear on the body in this battle, is immense. The pressure of pushing their powers to the maximum in the fight against Kokushibo is too much for their bodies. Kokushibo is able to see the attacks of the hunters who were hiding in Muichiro's mist, and Tanjiro knew that this wasn't because of his 6 eyes. Soon, understanding the demon's combat logic, Tanjiro also awakens the transparent world, seeing the demon's intentions and where his attacks would come from, evading all the moon slashes Kokushibo launched. And with the Hashira's distraction, Tanjiro exterminates Upper Moon 1. While this battle was happening, Shinobu, with her insect breathing, creates insect specters to distract Duma and apply her poison to the demon. While the heavyweights, Rengoku and Gyu, overwhelm him with their powerful attacks, defeating Upper Moon 2 without any deaths. As the castle collapses, Muzan is cornered. All the Hashiras are alive and at full strength. Sanemi, Gyu, and Obanai push the King of Demons until sunrise. Rengoku's flames are not efficient enough to completely burn Muzan. Tanjiro, the wielder of sun breathing, channels all his power against the Demon King. But by a twist of fate, or rather by Muzan's hand, he is caught off guard by a devastating blow, falls to the ground and faints, having visions of the past. Muzan Yorichi talking to one of his ancestors. Yorichi says that when Muzan discovered in his fight against the Slayer that the heat produced by his blade was something he couldn't withstand, he split himself into more than 1,500 pieces. Exactly. In this timeline, Yorichi never crossed his sword against Muzan's body because by pure instinct the Demon King ran away. After all, the heat would overload his cells, burning them completely. Now watch, Yorichi shows Tanjiro's ancestor how the technique works, so that on the day he meets Muzan, he can use it and destroy him with devastating heat. When he wakes up, Tanjiro heads back to the battle, and like a dragon surrounded by flames, Tanjiro performs the 13th form of sun breathing. The heat around the sword and the Slayer is tremendous, reaching over 5,500 degrees. This heat produced by the 13th form of sun breathing prevents any attempt to escape or cellular vision. But how does Tanjiro produce a heat of 5,500 degrees without incinerating his own body? The secret is not in the steel of the sword, but in the control of blood circulation, which aligns his worldview with his inner need. He learned to internalize the spiritual lesson that his life is a sacrifice for the future, transforming his fear into absolute courage. Tanjiro is able to channel the heat only outward, protecting his internal tissues through his breathing technique. Extreme cellular recovery. Mugen burns in flames until he becomes Tanjiro, channeling and protecting him. The sword and body are one. Victory is certain. Every journey of pain and suffering, and in Ballerina, everyone survives except for Gamage. The trembling hunter upon arriving dies because of the awakening of the mark. But the others, like Mutiro and Yu, now live with the awareness that their time is limited because of the mark. But they live in peace and enjoy the rest of their lives. Tanjiro and Nezuko return home, carrying the lesson that the true story is not what happens, but how what happened changed who they are forever. If you thought this video was insane, you need to see this one I picked out for you. I guarantee you'll like it. I'll see you there, otaku.